Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be looking at setting up a fresh instance of Falcon Player or FPP onto a Raspberry Pi. Now a lot of you will know that FPP is used to automate the scheduling of your show and to act as the show player, driving either pixels or panels connected directly to the Pi, or via a network. It can run things like a Falcon or a Culp, a Wally's board, lots of devices that can make up a big show. So let's get started. If you're right at the beginning, then here's what you're going to need to know and what you might need to purchase. So we're going to need obviously the Raspberry Pi itself. Now I currently recommend still the version 3B Plus. Not quite the latest version. The version 4s are out now and have been for a little while. But the 3B Plus has plenty of go for what we need it to do. It doesn't run too hot, so the Pi 4s tend to run a bit warmer and they need heat sinks and things. Now the 3B Plus has more than enough memory for what we're going to be using it for. It's only 1 gig, but that's plenty. It's not like it's trying to run a fully fledged GUI like a Windows operating system on that or anything like that. It's a very small Linux operating system with a simple scheduler and just a basic web interface that's configured externally. So the Pi itself doesn't need to have a huge amount of go to it. The 3B Plus has what's notionally called a gigabit Ethernet port. It isn't true gigabit because it's connected via the USB bus, so it maxes out at just over 300 megabits per second. But that's enough to run sort of 300,000 pixels on E131 at 40 frames per second, so it's going to take a large show to need more than that. Now, I've also got the power supply. This is a British one. For your location you may get a slightly different style. I've got a case. This is the official case. It might not be right for you if you're running a hat or cape on top of the Pi, connecting things directly to it. And you'll also need an SD card, a micro SD card in the majority of cases, unless you're running one of these ancient Pis from sort of 10 years ago when they used a full-sized SD card instead. Coincidentally, this will still work. The current FPP will still run on this old Pi, albeit slowly. But yeah, we'll put that back in the museum for now. Right, so we've got our SD card. Now this SD card is a SanDisk 32 gig. That's going to be plenty for what we're throwing at it today, but you can get larger cards if you wish to. Make sure that you get a good brand SD card and from a reputable supplier. There are lots of dodgy copies of these out and about, and they won't have the performance that we need, and in some cases they've even been seen to melt and do horrible things. So make sure you're getting a good known brand name when you're doing it. Now you might need, dependent on the machine that you're using, your desktop machine at this point or laptop, you might need an SD card reader in order to write the software onto the card for the first time. Now I use a little, it's over here. I use this little one here that came free, I think, with a 3D printer, and that works just fine for me. But again, any of the big box stores or online electronics stores will have one of those. It's just a little USB SD card adapter. The laptop that I'm using here is a Dell laptop, and that actually has one already built into it, so it might be that you don't need one at all. So let's get started at turning this pile of bits into a functional instance of FPP. The first thing I'm going to do is we need to download 2 pieces of software. One is the imaging software, the Raspberry Pi Imager, that we're going to use to write FPP onto the card. And the second is FPP itself. So let's jump onto the laptop and get them downloaded. So I've got my web browser open. First thing I'm going to do is go to raspberrypi.com/software. There we go. And this tells us about, this page is all about loading the Raspberry Pi OS, but the only bit we actually want from here is the imager. So I'm going to download this one for Windows. It's also available for Mac. I'm not a Mac man, so I can't advise on quite how you do it that way, but so we're going to run the Windows version. There we are. So that's now downloaded, nice and quick. And we're now going to download FPP and some really useful guys in the community. Thank you guys. I'm not sure who you are, but thank you. They've created a link called fppdownload.com, which just redirects to the GitHub page where you can get the software. So nice and simple to remember, fppdownload.com. There we go. So that's navigated through to GitHub. And version 6.3 is the current version at the time of recording. It's now the 2nd of January 23, and we're looking at FPP 6.3. So I'm going to go down. Now we're building a Raspberry Pi image, not a BBB or anything else. So we're going to go for the 6.3 Pi image.zip. That comes in at about a gig. So I'm going to accelerate this a bit because it's saying it's going to be about a 10-minute download. Whilst FPP is downloading from GitHub, I'm going to jump on and install the Raspberry Pi software that we're going to use to write the image to the card. Now, the image has to be written in a particular fashion to make sure that the boot sector is in the right point on the card and things like that. So you can't just take the image, the zip file, launch it onto the card and expect it to work, because it won't. So let's jump on and get that done now. Okay, it's just asking me if I want to make changes, so I've said yes. And I'm going to go to install. There we go. And finish. So there we are, a really small, lightweight installer there that didn't take very long at all. So we're at the Pi imager, so let's now go to choose operating system. And we're going to scroll down to the bottom to use a custom image from your computer. Now that's the file that we're actually downloading from GitHub in the background. So I'll select that, and it's there, but it's got a size at the moment of 0 bytes. Whilst that's busy doing its thing in the background, I'm going to get the Pi set up and ready to go so that we can plug it in as soon as our card is ready. So we're just going to, I've got the official case here. I'm just going to take the lid off it. Oh, there we go. That's the lid off. Then the sides come off. Ping. And last but not least, there we go. There's the case ready to go. Now I've got one here that I prepared earlier, so let's drop that in. Now it's got a little indent, little hole in the end for the SD card to go in, and the SD card goes into the socket there. So we're going to drop that in like so. There we go, and that just sits in the case like so. And then we can put the lid back on. Boom. And the sides. And the top. So there's our Pi now installed in its little box, ready to go. So we'll open up the power supply. I'll say this is a British one, yours may vary slightly. Now the Pi 3B Plus has a micro USB power port, power socket on the end, or micro USB plug even in English. Everything's a bit cold. It's about 10 or 11 degrees here in the studio at the minute, and it's all a bit chilly. Right, so let's just get that plugged in. There we go. So we're plugged in. And we're ready to connect as soon as our SD card is ready. Now, I'm not going to use a brand new one for this. Here's one I prepared earlier, which we will be using for this demo. So I'm going to insert that in, into the laptop ready to go. There we go. And it's telling me there's a problem with that drive. That's fine, because it just means it's not formatted for Windows properly. But we're going to overwrite it in a second anyway with our FPP build, so that's absolutely okay. There we go. So our download is finished of FPP. So we can now go back to Pi Imager. We've gone to choose OS. We're going to select use custom to use the image that we've just downloaded. And there it is. Now, you don't have to worry anymore about unzipping the file before you use it. The Raspberry Pi Imager can do that as part of the job. So we've just got to select the zip file and it will take it from there. So that's selected the zip file. We're going to choose which disk we want to put it on. There we go, and we've only got the one there. So we've selected that, and then we press write to write the image to the card. So it's now going to write the image out to the SD card. It will then do a verification of the image to make sure that it matches what it's supposed to be and that it's written okay. So the image has now been written to the card, and the installer is now just verifying the image to make sure that it matches the original and that the write has been successfully completed. And there we go. The Imager tool has now finished and has successfully written our FPP instance to the card. So we can now take the card out. Okay. And we can put it in the Pi. So let's just tip the Pi upside down, and the SD card is going to go like so. Now it's just a friction fit, it's not a click in, click out or anything like that on the 3B. So there we are, that's sat in there. And we can now start the Pi up by simply applying power. So here's our power cable, and I'm just going to plug it in. There we go. Now we've immediately got the red power indicator LED is on, and we can see that the orangey yellow disk indicator is now flashing away. So this instance of FPP will now be starting up. Now I've not connected any Ethernet to it or anything to the Pi. So what it's going to do is it's going to start up, and it's going to set itself up as a wireless access point with an ID of FPP. So we'll be able to log into that in a second to start configuration. Dependent on the design of your network, it might be that you want to leave the Pi connected wirelessly to your home network, but then use the Ethernet on board to connect to other show controllers, things like that, and use the Pi as a proxy. We'll be going through that in a bit more detail on another video to come. Okay, I think I've left it long enough. Let's have a look and see if the FPP instance is ready for connection. So I'm going to go down to my Wi-Fi settings, Wi-Fi, show available networks, there we go. We have an FPP instance ready to connect to. So I'm going to connect to that. Now because I've connected to one before, it's not asked me for the password, but the password to log in is Christmas with a capital C. Let's just having a quick mull over the security settings. Windows has a little think about life at this point sometimes, but I'm sure it's probably connected. So I'm going to go straight to back to my Firefox, in this case my browser, and I'm going to navigate to the Pi. Now the default IP address when you first log onto it in tethered mode, as we are now, just connecting into it over Wi-Fi, is 192.168.8.1. And there we are, there's our instance of FPP ready to go. Now there's a couple of settings we need to check at first log on to clear this initial setup screen. You want to double check the host name, if there's a description. If you want to share statistics about your FPP instance with the developers, you can turn that off or leave it enabled. If it's left on banner, then it will pop up a blue banner across once you've cleared this bit to remind you to set it. So I'm just going to disable it for now. I'm going to keep scrolling down and we'll come back to restart FPP in a moment. Share crash data is always a good thing. It does have issues sometimes. And then you can set up a Cape hat if you have one, your locale, where you are, time zone, long lat, etc. And down at the bottom we've got two mandatory things that you've got to populate. These are UI password. I will typically leave that disabled. If somebody's got as far as breaking into your network and got as far as FPP, then you've got bigger problems than this. And OS password, which I'm going to leave as default for the purposes of this video. So with those set, we can finish setup up the top here. It takes us back to the top, and it's now saying that we've got unused space on our SD card. Now, the Pi image comes as a relatively small, well, relatively 1 gig sized file, and that's the size of the image that's currently written to the SD card. But this SD card is a 32 gig card, yours may vary, and so to use the full capacity of said card, we need to expand the 1 gig system that we installed out to the full 32. So I'm going to say yes by going to storage settings as it advises. I'm going to scroll down and go to grow file system. Growing the system requires a reboot. Are we sure? Yes, we are. Thank you. There we go. That's done. So it says please reboot, and there's an OK button just hidden at the bottom of my screen here. So I'm just going to grab that. There it is. So it's saved that. And if we go back to top, this is a useful new feature that's been added recently. We can then click reboot, and the Pi will then restart ready for us. And there we go, there's the message, FPP is rebooting. Now it doesn't take very long. I'm just keeping half an eye on the activity light on the side of the Pi, and once that's stopped flashing, that's a good indicator that FPP is back up and running, and I should be able to log back onto it. There we go, that's pretty much calmed down now, so let me drop back down to network, Wi-Fi, reconnect to FPP. Now it's dropped because of course the Pi has rebooted, so that's dropped the whole Wi-Fi connection, and thus we've got to pick it up again to get back onto it. There we are, that's come back. Don't update. And now I can, there we go, restart my, refresh my browser, and we're ready to go. So going across from the top, we've got details of the instance of FPP, so we can see that it's a version 6.3. We've got the host name. This would have changed if you've changed the host name on your device. The current status of FPP, what it's doing, and it's sitting at idle waiting for us to do something. The CPU temperature, that's nice and cool, around 36 degrees C. An IP address on wireless LAN, and we can see because it's got the A up there and it says tether, this is because it's generating its own access point that we've connected to. The date and time. Now this Pi hasn't rebooted, it hasn't connected to the outside world, it hasn't connected to a time source, so it doesn't know what the real date and time is. The Raspberry Pis don't have a real-time clock on board, so they don't remember what date and time it is. They have to go and get it from an external source when they first start. Now, whether that be a network time server, an NTP server on your network or on the internet, or it may be that you have a hat or cape with a real-time clock chip on board and a little battery to keep it in time. Either way, either of those will work, and the Pi will then update the date and time as soon as it can. And last of all, we have the model here of the Pi. As we can see, as I said, this is a 3B plus, and this will do fine to run the majority of your shows. I'm not going to go any further into FPP at this time. I just wanted to run through getting it set up, getting it ready to go, and that's what we've just done in the last few minutes. So I hope you found that useful. Take care, have fun, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye-bye.